It's now 27 weeks since I lost Dec. In that time, I have been driving the van, was driving the van, when I realised that he had stopped speaking to me, to look up and realise his heart had stopped and there was nothing I could do about it. I had to just sit with him until the paramedics came and eventually assist them in moving his wheelchair so that they could get him out of the van onto a stretcher and into an ambulance, where they then took him to the mortuary. As it was a bank holiday and he passed away on the Saturday, it wasn't until the Tuesday that I got to go and see him. I then, in all of that, had to, or my family helped, because I was just nowhere, to have him taken to a funeral director's, where I then would go and see him every day. I hold his hand, I helped wash him, dress him, put him in his favourite Syndicate t-shirt, sat there for hours with him, as it was the only place I wanted to be. Even though I knew his spirit wasn't in his body was the only thing familiar to me. I then had to organise his funeral. I carried his coffin down the very aisle at the place where he was christened and where he walked me down the aisle the day I got married. Following on from that, I said the eulogy, which I will repost at the end of this for those of you that weren't following me or us back then. We then went back to the funeral home, where he was then taken to the hospital for a post-mortem that was meant to have been done the following day but was actually done a week later. It was then another week and a half to 2 weeks before he was buried. I still went and saw him every day. He really wanted the summer Syndicate t-shirt, so Tom beautifully, literally gave me the t-shirt off his back, as they hadn't been released. So Declan was buried in an exclusive worn by Tom Syndicate t-shirt. I then had to watch my son in his eco casket in a natural burial ground. His body, I had to see that going into the ground, knowing that was the last time I could ever hold his hand. Since then, I've had to learn to walk the dogs again, keeping my head down, because I've struggled to see people like locally. I've had to do his 25th birthday, which I climbed the Eiffel Tower, which is something that was on Dec's bucket list. I've come back to Australia. I'm trying to work my way through his bucket list, both with the van and places he wanted to visit, and that he wanted me to visit when he no longer was with me, because there were places he couldn't visit because he couldn't fly any longer, or they weren't wheelchair friendly. So 10 days before I lost Dec, he was having a bit of a rubbish day, and we actually went to Lucy, his best friend's house, which was a very similar drive to the last drive we did. And during that drive we were chatting, and he said he wished he had my beliefs, my faith in the spirit world, the afterlife. And I said to him, whilst discussing that, where do you want me to go? Where is the one place in the world that you want to see through my eyes, that you want to be with me? And out of nowhere I said, like Bali. I don't know why I said Bali. It's not been somewhere that I've ever wanted to go to or somewhere we spoke about. Then he just went quiet, and I thought, okay, this is something he can't talk about. There was Dec knew what was happening, and there was times he could talk about it, and there was other times it was just too painful, and I realised we'd got to that point, so I changed the subject. A few days later, he just said to me, "Remember what you said in the van, Mother?" He called me Mother. And I was like, "Dec, say a lot in the van." And he went, "About going to Bali. I'd like you to go there. I'd like you to do that." So it seemed, as it's only a 6-hour flight away from Australia, that I killed 2 birds with 1 stone. So I'm now in Bali. There is something about that 6-month point that's really hit me. And I feel like I've gone back in time, grieving wise, that it's become so incredibly raw. Like, I just saw someone wearing a t-shirt that said "This is us," and if you've not watched the programme on Amazon Prime, please watch it. This is us. And it's an amazing programme that follows the life of a family with triplets, and it goes forward and backwards in time. Like, it's fictional, but it also follows the death of one of the main characters, and it really brought up conversations between Dec and myself about death. And even the reason why one of the readings was chosen for his funeral, about going on a train, was because of the final episode of This Is Us, when that main character is basically dying in a coma, and where her brain takes her to in her final moments. I might add that actually at the end of the video, after the eulogy. Just make sure you've got tissues with you. But just seeing that t-shirt just set me off. So yeah, that's what I've been doing in the last 27 weeks. I've gone from having my world was Dec, and I know people say your children's your world. Literally, it was me, Dec, and our 2 dogs. No husband, no other kids. Me and Dec, like I've previously said, my son, my best friend, my soulmate, my absolute hero. And it's hard enough surviving whilst doing incredible things, visiting incredible countries. Right now, the future of going back to a relatively normal life scares the hell out of me. Our story began on the 3rd of October 1998, the day my world changed forever, when I first met Declan, the person I held in my arms and fell utterly in love with. That day will forever be in my memory as the day that the deepest bond of my life was made. As a very young mom-to-be, I'd made a deal with God. I would treasure this child as a gift from him. I'd make sure that this precious little gift would never doubt, even for a moment, how loved he was, how special he is. I knew it might not be possible to give him many material things. Apart from his Moses basket and some of his clothes, much of what he had as a baby was second-hand. But I promised God that I would give him everything that money couldn't buy. Our bond quickly grew with every moment that we made, with a kiss on his forehead every night and being told, "I love you to the moon and back, times infinity." And I told him if there was any time we were ever apart, he could look up into the night sky and know that he and I were seeing the same part of the moon. On a sleepover, look at the moon, I'll be looking at it too. I think back to the things he enjoyed as a very young child. Programmes like Bob the Builder and the Tweenies, and before anything else, the start of his lifelong love of cars. From as early as he was able to hold a toy car, There would always be a car, as he called them, in his hand, with any surface becoming a racetrack. It means a great deal to me that even the last time he was able to go to La Rosse, he was given a little Bugatti by one of his friends there. He would joke that he had petrol running through his veins and could name most cars just by their headlights. Two of the characters in the Tweenies are Jake and Milo, and they remind me of Dec and his great friend Reese. Dec was like Jake, the quieter one. Reese was like Milo, the go-getter in those stories. Jake might seem to take a back seat for a while, and like Jake, Dec was happy to observe at first, but when he came to say something, people listened. It would hit the mark. Something thoughtful, helpful, interesting, and so often very, very funny. We shared such happiness, and that continued throughout Declan's life, even though once his condition was diagnosed, behind every smile from that day onwards, there was also a tear. It was the 3rd of July 2006 that the diagnosis of Duchenne muscular dystrophy was made, which turned our lives on its axis. He was still my little cheeky freckled-faced 7-year-old, but I knew our journey would take a very different direction from that day forward. As I walked back to the children's outpatients playroom and helped Dec up onto a rocking horse, I saw a poem on the wall. A meeting was held quite far from earth. It's time again for another birth, said the angels to the Lord above. This special child will need much love. His progress may be very slow, accomplishments he may not show, and he'll require extra care from folks he'll meet way down there. He may not run or laugh or play, his thoughts may seem quite far away. In many ways, he won't adapt, and he'll be known as handicapped. So let's be careful where he's sent. We want his life to be content. Please, Lord, find the parents who will do a special job for you. They will not realise right away the leading role they're asked to play. But with this child sent from above comes a stronger faith and a richer love. As soon as they'll know the privilege given in caring from this gift from heaven, their precious charge, so meek and mild, is heaven's very special child. I knew at that moment what a privilege it was to be Dec's mom, and how he was still going to have the most amazing life. Over the next 5 years, he lost the ability to stand, walk, and eventually needed spinal surgery due to his spinal muscles being too weak to keep his spine. The surgery was a long, distressing 9 hours for me, fearing the worst. But he came through it, and soon after he began to come round. His head was gently bobbing, and after a moment I realised it was because there was music playing in the background. The music was "I'm Sexy and I Know It." Duchenne's didn't define Dec. In his case, he defined it. It was only a very tiny part of who he was, and the way that he lived with it showed so much about his character. In 2015, we set sail on our first cruise. Now flying was incredibly difficult, only to end up in the air, being airlifted to a hospital in France after Declan had sepsis and liver failure. I was told that he wouldn't make it through the night while I sat stroking his hair and praying for a miracle. The following days were a waiting game, as the doctors told me it would be hard enough for a healthy person's liver to recover, let alone Declan's fragile body. A few days later, blood tests showed that there was a slight improvement with his liver, and he started to be able to speak. I was warned to stop being so excited, as he still had a long way to go and the prognosis was still bleak, to which I replied, "You don't know Dec, he'll be fine." And sure enough, he was, and he joked about being the second coming. Dec was my soulmate. We were a team. He was determined to live life, and we tried as hard as we possibly could to defy predictions, even regularly massaging his calves and doing stretches to enable him to still wear his Air Force Ones. On paper, he shouldn't have been eating, but somehow he had made his body teach itself not to aspirate. There was an occasion where he was asked how he could possibly know where an infection he had was located, but he was proved right that it was in actual fact the lower part of his right lung. He stayed in mainstream school, becoming prom king, went to college, but his greatest achievement was learning to drive with only his hands in a massive Mercedes Sprinter, which was quickly replaced with his beloved Ford. The freedom and normality that he felt from driving was breathtaking. He even drove us all the way to Norfolk while singing along to Radio 1. In reality, he actually didn't in any way realise how special he was. When he learnt to drive, he thought it was normal, just something everybody else was doing. He often didn't understand the enormity of the ways that he was managing to live life to the full, as far as he possibly could. Dec was a kind, funny, beautiful soul. One of his close friends aiming to pass her driving test was inspired because knowing Declan made her just want to really go for it all the more, and gave her a way to meet up with him more regularly, as being with Dec made her feel safe and unjudged. Often suffering so much, he would still be thinking of others. In recent weeks, it upset him that he couldn't text his friends very much. He worried that they would be distressed as what it might mean if they weren't hearing from him. His van also brought us to the Ford Club, a wonderful bunch of people who quickly became like family, not once treating Dec any differently, and giving him the friendship group and a sense of belonging which he had been hoping for. Not quite the Torettos living in Los Angeles driving Dodge Chargers and R34 Skylines, but Lester driving STs and Cosworths, meeting at pubs, our own little fast and furious family. I miss him making me laugh, the eye rolls, the things he said, his joke about putting his foot down. We always carried on using natural expressions like, "Are we going for a walk?" But his one-liners were never far away. Sometimes after, "Are we going for a walk?" his reply would be, "That would be a flipping miracle." He sometimes in frustration thought of himself as still a child, less streetwise than he wanted to be, but he had the wisdom and maturity beyond what a 24-year-old should have to have. At such a young age, to be reflecting on your own mortality, when he loved a film such as Avatar, to be afraid he might not get to see the sequel, which thankfully he did. To be choosing an eco-casket for his funeral. However, this reflected his love of the premise of Avatar, one of his favourite films. The idea of people being powered by the earth, by the trees, and at the end of life their spirits passing into the roots of those trees. He chose a natural burial because he believed that the body should become one with nature and be part of the earth and the trees and animals that the earth sustains. To me, Dec was the sun, the heart of the universe, the source of light and warmth, which without there could be no life on earth. When he was given the prognosis of months to live, he felt it was the kick up the arse to really live, and he created a bucket list. The top of his list was to have a hot chocolate by the Eiffel Tower, something he unfortunately never managed to do, but I will do this for you on your birthday, darling, with your spirit by my side. However, what he did manage to do before he became too poorly was to be rich for a day, which included a personal shopping experience at Selfridges, with his final purchase being his only choice of footwear, Nike Air Force Ones, yet another colour for the collection. His Air Force Ones, his glasses, and of course his van were and will always be his trademark. Another wish was to meet his favourite YouTuber, Tom, who is here today, showing that meeting my boy once was enough to be blessed with the Dec effect, which is unforgettable and inspiring. Recently, I'd been doing mindfulness with Dec to help calm him when the discomfort and frustration got too much. On his final morning, we used the colour yellow, being a comforting colour, the colour of the sun, a colour that to us meant peace and tranquility. We imagined this colour running through his body, trickling around every fibre of his brain, to his arms, his heart, his lungs, right through to his toes, that as the yellow flew through his body, he would feel peace, comfort, and allow his body to relax. I take some peace in knowing that this thought was helping him on his final day with me. I take some peace in that fact, and on the last day, if there had to be a goodbye, this was how it was written. There was no hospital, no tubes, no carers. It was just the two of us having a heartfelt chat, even about how soulmates aren't necessarily partners, and that he hasn't missed out, as I've been here all along. When his heart took its last beat, and part of mine died. One last car journey, our conversations, music playing, my hand on his right leg. He wasn't scared. In the story of my life, as in any novel, if the key person has left the scene, that person is part of the whole book, right through to the end. He will always be the lead character in my story. There won't be a chapter that he isn't in. It's true that with the gift of this child, heaven sent, came stronger faith and richer love. Such a blessing in sharing my life with him. God bless you, my baby. I said you were too good for this world. I ask God to surround you with love and to keep me always knowing that you are close, sharing your strength with me, holding my hand through life.